Well, okay, with me now in Washington is our senior correspondent there, Colin Campbell, and here in London, the Director of International Alert, Dan Smith. Welcome to you both. Dan, can I start with you first? Your organisation is all about reducing conflict and trying to build peace, but there's not much room for manoeuvre here tonight. I mean, apart from anything else, the father of the pilot calling for the complete annihilation of the Islamic State, and I think that the mood in Jordan, as we can see, has palpably changed over the past couple of days.
Yes, and who knows how volatile it is and how it may change back and swing back and forth. But I mean, as you put it, there is very little room for manoeuvre at the moment. The problem is that every step that is taken further into this conflict, it is the classic morass. The further you go, the harder it will be to come back. And while it's not clear at all to anybody what is really the solution that can build peace, I think you can be fairly sure that simply lashing out and striking back is not going to be the action that builds peace. And the Jordanian government itself faces some very restricted choices. I mean, it can really only do the bombing that fits within the coalition strategy.
So it can't take any unilateral action. It has to be within the coalition.
I think it does, both politically but maybe even technically as well, for target acquisition purposes and getting the intelligence and so on. And then secondly, you know, well, we've seen the pictures of Kobani. We know what airstrikes can do and how much, if there's going to be a military solution, they've got to be, as they put it, boots on the ground. Well, there are not going to be, I think, Jordanian boots on the ground in Syria chasing ISIS around. I don't think that's an option for the Jordanian government. So their room for manoeuvre is also very, very, very limited.
OK, let's bring in Colin Campbell here. Colin, how's the White House reacting to all of the events of the past 24 hours or so? I mean, I gather that the United Arab Emirates has either withdrawn from the coalition or is at least considering it.
Yeah, there's a bit of a concern after U.S. officials say that the UAE, a key Arab member of the U.S.-led coalition against extremists, hasn't flown combat missions over Syria since December after Moath al-Qasasbeh was captured. Now, they've had concerns over what are called CSAR missions, combat search and rescue efforts, especially using that hybrid type of helicopter called an Osprey, which is very effective of flying over a certain area with precision and extracting troubled pilots. And of course, Emirati officials were questioning U.S. officials over why there weren't stronger efforts for these CSAR missions to prevent what happened to the Jordanian pilot. And that's why we haven't seen much action from the UAE. So experts are saying behind the scenes right now, U.S. officials are trying to work on how they can optimize what are these CSAR missions and, of course, allay any type of fears from the UAE that they are going to be more effective at doing these types of missions so that the UAE can be a part of the coalition-led effort against extremists again. The U.S., of course, is welcoming Jordan's stronger commitment to being a part of the coalition, but they don't want to see more members dropping out. Of course, this is a fear that more members may drop out after seeing the UAE not wanting to be a part of them and other nations possibly having fears that the U.S. isn't as strongly led as they would like them to be in trying to lead any type of rescue mission efforts or just pushing extremists back.
Colin, do you think that we are any further forward to seeing some kind of ramp-up situation, if I can put it that way, as far as the United States is concerned? I mean, there's been talk over the past, well, few months about American boots on the ground, perhaps, helping the Iraqi army, such as it is, and helping the Peshmerga as well, the Kurdish Peshmerga. But what more are we hearing about that?
Well, there hasn't been a whole lot of strident conversation about putting boots on the ground. As we know, the Obama administration has been very reluctant to be engaged in another war. The Obama legacy is one that was almost certainly going to be predicated on winding down wars, coming out of conflicts, not necessarily getting into them. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that more weaponry may not be involved, that more training of troops in the area may not be more involved, sending U.S. troops to that area to provide some type of tactical assistance or support, but not necessarily being more engaged. Again, we're looking at a Republican-controlled Congress now. They have to show that they are willing to lead, especially when it comes to issues, when it comes to foreign policy. And I think some of the more hawkish members of the Congress are eager to show leadership over this issue. They have been caucusing behind closed doors over what types of congressional action would be needed in order to bolster U.S. support in that area and strengthening coalition efforts. Of course, they are looking at walking this fine line between what congressional action would be and what they would want to allow President Obama to authorize. They are very reluctant to give the president too much power, even though he had called for more executive action and executive authority during his State of the Union address in January.
Colin, stay with us, if you will. Dan, here in the studio. Do you think it was right, it was correct of the Jordanians to execute the two militants earlier today by hanging, particularly the woman would-be suicide bomber?
Yes, I mean, they had both been sentenced to death and held for some years. The woman was sentenced to death for an action in 2005. No, I mean, I don't think it was right, but that's because I don't believe in capital punishment to begin with. It's a matter of moral choice. But I think, secondly, I don't see what good it does. I mean, what terrorism is about in its kind of crystalline, pure form, and we've seen one of the most sort of frightening pure forms of terrorism right now, is sending a message to influence action. And look at what they're managing to do. They're toying with the ISIS, what they're managing to do. They're toying with the Jordanian government. They're pushing the other Arab states around, and they're giving very clear messages to the Arab populations, including in Jordan. I think we'll see opinion changing again when the first wave of anger washes over.
The mood is very dark just now. We're watching these pictures there. But do you agree that the so-called Islamic State is so barbarous now, so beyond the pale, that the only solution would be, as the pilot's father was suggesting today, was to annihilate it completely, if that could in fact be done?
Well, firstly, can it in fact be done? Secondly, if you destroy that beast, another will spring up from the ruins or the wreckage. That is surely the lesson we've learned. So I think that if you're talking about the language of annihilation, that would be to remove the problem. Now, that must be a political solution. And the difficulty that we have here is that ISIS grows from a history. It grows from Al-Qaeda, which it was a spin-off from. Al-Qaeda grows out of religious militant circles in Saudi Arabia and Egypt, going back some 30, 40 years, developing steadily through their frustrations about their ruling regimes. And in one way or another, I'm afraid to say that the opportunity for peace and the room for maneuver for peace building will come if and when and as those governments change to be less autocratic and to be giving more hope and more participation in development for their citizens, for their people.
Sure. Colin, just before we leave it, and if we could be brief, if possible, relations between the United States and Jordan still as close as ever, we're hearing. What, $1 billion in aid over the past few months or so, and that's a doubling of aid, I think. So, as we were suggesting, America giving all support possible to the Jordanians tonight.
Yes, and we can expect that they will possibly give more aid to Jordanians, especially now that they have talked about being a bigger part of the U.S.-led coalition. Of course, with the dearth of the UAE and its cache of F-16s that had been attacking militant in key locations, now the U.S. is going to focus a little bit more on Jordan, providing it with what this country needs in order to take the fight to extremists.
Colin, thank you very much for that. Very good to talk to you tonight. And Dan Smith here in the studio, thank you very much as well.
Thank you.